The morning of my 67th birthday broke with a chill that seemed to seep into my bones, as if the world itself knew something I didn't. My house, a weathered sentinel of oak and stone, nestled at the edge of Willow's Hollow, stood silent under a sky bruised with clouds. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like a storm waiting to unleash its secrets. I'd grown accustomed to solitude since Martha passed, the quiet wrapping around me, like an old coat, comforting yet heavy. But today something stirred in that stillness, a ripple in the fabric of routine that set my nerves on edge. I found it on the porch just after dawn, a box no larger than a bread loaf carved from mahogany so dark it seemed to drink the light. Its edges gleamed with gold filigree, intricate as a spider's web, and it sat there like an offering from some forgotten god. No delivery truck had rumbled down my gravel drive, no footsteps had creaked on the warped boards of my porch. It was simply there as if conjured by a will not my own. A card rested atop it, cream-colored and crisp, with two words scrawled in ink black as midnight, "Happy Birthday." The handwriting was unmistakable, Emily's. My daughter. The daughter who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, not since her mother's funeral when her eyes had turned cold, her voice sharp as a blade. I stood there, the card trembling slightly in my calloused fingers, my breath catching in my chest. Emily's script was sharp and deliberate, each loop and curve a memory of her childhood notes, tucked into my lunch pail, her teenage journals I'd glimpsed before she shut me out. But this felt different. The ink seemed to shimmer faintly under the weak morning light, as if it carried a pulse of its own. I hadn't seen her since she'd married into the Hale family, their wealth casting a shadow over our fractured bond. Why now? Why this? The box itself was a work of art. Its wood polished to a mirror sheen, the gold trim catching the dawn like embers. I ran my fingers along its surface, expecting warmth, but it was cold unnaturally, so as if it had been pulled from a place where light never lingered. I lifted the lid, and the hinges moved without a sound, revealing 10 Cuban cigars nestled in velvet, their rich, earthy scent rising like a whisper from the earth. They were exquisite, the kind a man might have boasted about in smoky parlors decades ago, before I'd sworn off tobacco. 2 years prior, pneumonia had nearly claimed me, leaving my lungs scarred and my days numbered. Emily knew this. She had to know. Yet here they were, a gift as beautiful as it was wrong. I closed the box, my heart thudding against ribs that felt too frail for the weight of this moment. The air around me thickened the way it does before a storm, and for a fleeting second I swore I heard a low hum, a sound not of this world emanating from the box itself. I shook my head, chalking it up to the creaks of an old man's mind, but the unease lingered. I carried the box inside, setting it on the kitchen table where it seemed to command the room, its presence, both regal and menacing. The card I tucked into my pocket, its edges sharp against my fingers, as if it could cut through skin to bone. Sitting in my worn leather chair, I stared at the box, my mind unraveling threads of memory. Emily as a child, her laughter bright as summer, her tiny hand clutching mine as we walked through the Hollow's wildflower fields. She'd draw maps on my chest with her finger, pretending we were explorers, charting unknown lands. But those days were gone, buried beneath years of silence. After Martha's death, Emily had drifted, her calls growing sparse, her visits non-existent. When she married Daniel Hale, heir to a fortune built on secrets I'd never cared to unravel, she stopped calling me Dad. I became Jack, a name spoken with the detachment of a stranger. I reached for the phone, then stopped. What would I say? Thank you for the gift. But why does it feel like a warning? The thought twisted in my gut, sharp and cold. Emily hadn't cared when I'd lain in the hospital tubes, snaking from my arms, my breath a rattle in my chest. She hadn't asked about my health, my days, my life. So why this extravagant gesture? Why now, after years of nothing? The box seemed to pulse faintly in the corner of my vision, its gold trim catching the flicker of the kitchen light. I blinked, and the illusion vanished, but the doubt remained. I stood pacing the creaking floorboards, my shadow stretching long and thin across the room. The hollow had always been a place of whispers, old stories of spirits lingering in the trees, of objects appearing where they shouldn't. I'd dismissed them as folklore, but now with that box sitting like a sentinel on my table, I wasn't so sure. I thought of Richard Hale, Emily's father-in-law, a man who'd shared cigars with me in better days before my lungs betrayed me. He still smoked his laughter rough with tobacco's edge. Perhaps he'd appreciate the gift more than I could. I drove to Richard's house that afternoon, the box in the passenger seat, its presence a weight I couldn't shake. The road wound through the hollow past gnarled oaks that seemed to lean closer as I passed their branches clawing at the sky. Richard lived on the edge of town, his home a sprawling relic of wealth, its windows glinting like eyes. When I handed him the box, his face lit up, his fingers tracing the gold trim with reverence. "Jack, these are a king's ransom," he said, his voice warm but tinged with something I couldn't place, envy perhaps, or curiosity. I forced a smile, muttering something about Emily's thoughtfulness, though the words tasted like ash. As I drove back, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in like a tide. The card burned in my pocket, its 2 words, "Happy Birthday," now a riddle I couldn't solve. I thought of Emily, her sharp eyes, her calculated smile, the way she'd asked about my pension years ago, her voice casual but her gaze hungry. The memory sent a shiver through me, not from the cold, but from a deeper primal instinct. Something was wrong. The box, the cigars, the timing, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't been invited to solve. That night I sat by the window, the hollow, cloaked in darkness beyond the glass. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock. Martha had loved its rhythm, a reminder of time slipping away. I pulled the card from my pocket, holding it to the lamplight. The ink seemed to shift, the letters curling slightly as if alive. I rubbed my eyes, blaming fatigue, but the unease grew. I remembered a story Martha used to tell about gifts that carried curses, objects that bound the giver and receiver in ways unseen. I'd laughed then, her tales a charming quirk. Now I wasn't so sure. I placed the card beside the clock, its edges glowing faintly in the dim light. The box was gone, given to Richard, but its shadow lingered in my mind. I thought of Emily, her silence these past years, her sudden gesture of generosity. Was it a peace offering or something darker? My fingers brushed the scar on my chest, a reminder of the pneumonia that had nearly ended me. Emily knew I couldn't smoke, knew my lungs were fragile as glass. Yet she'd sent cigars extravagant, tempting, and utterly useless to me. The phone rang, shattering the silence. My hand froze above the receiver, my heart pounding as if it knew who was on the other end. I lifted it slowly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Hello, Dad," Emily's voice, smooth as silk, laced with a sweetness I hadn't heard in years. "Did you get my gift?" I gripped the receiver, my knuckles whitening. The room seemed to close in the air, thick with something I couldn't name. "Yes," I said, my tone even betraying nothing. "I got it." There was a pause, a heartbeat too long. "Did you like it?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of something sharp like a blade hidden in velvet. I glanced at the card, its ink still shimmering faintly, impossibly. "It's thoughtful," I said, choosing my words like steps on thin ice. "But you know I don't smoke anymore, Emily." Another pause, this one heavier, as if she were weighing my words against her own. "Oh, Dad," she said, her laugh high and brittle like glass about to shatter. "I just thought you'd appreciate something special, for old time's sake." The line went dead before I could respond, her laughter echoing in my ears. I sat there, the receiver still in my hand, the room colder than before. Outside, the wind howled through the hollow, carrying whispers I couldn't decipher. The card lay on the table, its words no longer just a greeting but a warning, a challenge, a spell cast in ink. I didn't know what Emily wanted, but I knew one thing: this gift was no accident. It was a move in a game I hadn't agreed to play, and I would need every ounce of strength to survive it. The night after Emily's call, sleep eluded me. The house creaked under the weight of the hollow's restless wind, each groan of the floorboards like a whisper from the shadows. I sat in my leather chair, the card with its shimmering ink still on the table, its words "Happy Birthday" burning in my mind like a riddle carved in stone. The memory of Emily's voice, that brittle laugh, clung to me like damp fog. I'd given the mahogany box of cigars to Richard Hale, thinking it a harmless gesture, a way to pass on a gift I couldn't use. But now doubt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless, as if the box itself had left a curse in its wake. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the sky over Willow's Hollow bruised with clouds that seemed to pulse with secrets. I was pouring coffee, the bitter scent grounding me, when my phone rang again. The number was Richard's, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was Margaret, his wife, her words trembling like leaves in a storm. "Jack," she said, her voice breaking, "it's Richard. He's in the hospital. Something's wrong. He collapsed last night, after smoking one of those cigars you gave him." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor, coffee pooling like dark blood. My chest tightened, not from my scarred lungs, but from a dread that felt alive, coiling around my heart. "What do you mean, collapsed?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my bones. "He couldn't breathe," Margaret whispered. His lips turned blue. "Jack, the doctors, they don't know what it is yet, but they said it wasn't his heart. It was something else, something unnatural." Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, though she didn't voice it. Not yet. I gripped the edge of the table, the room tilting slightly as if the hollow itself were shifting beneath me. The cigars, Emily's gift. The shimmering ink, the cold mahogany, her calculated laugh, they swirled in my mind, pieces of a puzzle, snapping into place with sickening clarity. "I'm coming," I said, hanging up before Margaret could respond. I grabbed my coat, the card still in my pocket, its edges sharp as a blade against my thigh. The hospital was a sterile labyrinth, its halls reeking of antiseptic and fear. Machines hummed like distant chants, their rhythm both clinical and eerie, as if echoing the pulse I'd sensed from the mahogany box. Richard lay in a bed in the ICU, his face pale as ash tubes snaking from his arms, monitors blinking with numbers I didn't understand. Margaret sat beside him, her hands clutching a styrofoam cup, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Jack," she said as I approached, her voice low, almost a hiss. "They tested his blood. It wasn't an illness, it was poison." The word struck me like a physical blow, my breath catching in my scarred lungs. Poison. I saw the mahogany box in my mind, its gold trim glinting like eyes in the dark. "Poison," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. From what Margaret's gaze locked onto mine, her hands trembling around the cup. "They think it was in the cigar," she said. "The one you gave him." Her words weren't an accusation, not exactly, but they carried a weight that pinned me in place. "You brought those cigars, Jack. Where did they come from?" I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. The room seemed to close in the air, thick with something heavier than antiseptic. A presence intangible but real, as if the hollow's whispers had followed me here. "Emily sent them," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "For my birthday. I don't smoke anymore, so I gave them to Richard." Margaret's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She didn't need to finish the thought. The truth hung between us, sharp and cold. Emily, my daughter, had sent a gift that nearly killed a man. And if I hadn't given the cigars away, it would have been me lying in that bed, my lungs failing, my life slipping away. I left the hospital under a sky that seemed to press down on me, the November air cutting through my jacket like a warning. Each breath burned a reminder of the pneumonia that had scarred me 2 years ago, a battle I'd fought and won. But this felt different. This wasn't a disease. This was betrayal woven with a precision that chilled me to the core. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling to life, and drove back to the hollow, the road twisting through trees that seemed to watch me pass. At home, I set the card on the kitchen table, its ink catching the light in a way that made my skin prickle. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every fear. I paced my boots, thudding against the floorboards, each step a question I couldn't answer. Why would Emily send poisoned cigars? Why now, after years of silence? I thought of her as a child, her laughter bright as the wildflowers that dotted the hollow, her tiny hand sketching imaginary maps on my chest as we sat on the porch. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman I barely recognized, one whose eyes gleamed with calculation rather than love. I sat at the table, the card staring back at me. The ink shimmered again, a faint pulse that made my heart skip. I leaned closer, half expecting the words to shift, to reveal something more, a message hidden beneath the surface. But they remained unchanged. Happy birthday. Yet the air around the card felt heavy, as if it carried a secret too vast for paper. I thought of the Hollow's old tales, stories Martha used to whisper about objects imbued with intent, gifts that bound the giver to the receiver in ways that defied reason. I'd dismissed them as fables, but now, with Richard fighting for his life, I wondered if there was truth in those whispers. I reached for the phone, my fingers hovering over the keys. I wanted to call Emily to demand answers, to hear her voice crack under the weight of her own lies. But something stopped me, a flicker of instinct sharp as a blade. If she'd sent poison, she'd expect me to react, to accuse, to falter. I wouldn't give her that, not yet. Instead, I stood, my shadow stretching across the room, and made a silent vow I would uncover the truth, not with rage, but with the patience that had kept me alive through pneumonia, through loss, through years of silence. The next morning I drove back to the hospital. Richard was stable, but only just. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the machines. His eyes closed, his face etched with lines deeper than I remembered. Margaret sat beside him, her hand still clutching that same styrofoam cup, now crumpled at the edges. "They're running more tests," she said, her voice hollow. "They found traces of something rare. A toxin, they called it. Not natural, not something you'd find in a cigar unless someone put it there." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Did they say what it was?" "Not yet," she replied, her eyes searching mine. "But Jack, you didn't know, did you? When you gave him those cigars?" The question cut deeper than I expected, not because I doubted myself, but because it forced me to face the truth. My daughter, my blood, had woven a trap that ensnared not just me, but an innocent man. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I didn't know. But I'm going to find out who did." Margaret's gaze softened, but there was a flicker of something else, pity perhaps, or fear. "Be careful, Jack," she whispered. "There's something off about this, like it's more than just poison." Her words echoed the unease I'd felt since opening that box, the hum I'd heard, the shimmer in the ink. I wanted to dismiss it, to cling to the logic of a grieving father, but the hollow had a way of blurring the line between reason and mystery. I left the hospital with a fire in my chest, not of anger, but of resolve. Emily had made her move, but I wasn't the frail old man she thought me to be. I was Jack Carter, survivor of illness, of loss, of a daughter's betrayal. And I would face whatever darkness she'd unleashed, whether it came from her heart or something older, something deeper. Back home I stood on the porch, the hollow stretching before me, its trees swaying in a wind that carried whispers I couldn't quite catch. The card was in my hand again, its ink glinting like a beacon in the fading light. I thought of Richard fighting for breath, of Emily's laugh, sharp and hollow. And I thought of the box now in the hospital's evidence locker, its mahogany gleaming with secrets I hadn't yet unraveled. This wasn't just a gift gone wrong. It was a declaration, a challenge, a spell cast in smoke and ink. And I would answer it, not with weakness, but with the strength I'd forged in the fires of survival. The night after leaving the hospital, I sat in my kitchen, the silence of the house pressing against me like a living thing. The card from Emily, happy birthday, lay on the table, its ink catching the lamplight in a way that made my skin prickle, as if it were watching me. The hollow outside was restless, the wind weaving through the oaks with a low, mournful hum that sounded too much like a voice. I'd always thought the stories of Willow's Hollow were just that, stories. Tales of spirits lingering in the shadows of objects that carried whispers of intent. But now with Richard fighting for his life, and Emily's betrayal cutting deeper than any blade, I wasn't so sure. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and closed my eyes. Memories came unbidden, sharp and vivid like shards of glass glinting in the dark. Emily at 5, her hair in messy braids, chasing fireflies across the yard as the summer sun dipped below the hollow's horizon. She'd laugh, her voice a melody that could coax a smile from even my weariest days. Back then I'd smoke a cigar on the porch, the smoke curling upward like a prayer, while she sat on my lap, her tiny finger tracing imaginary maps across my chest. "We're explorers, Daddy," she'd say, her eyes wide with wonder. "We'll find treasure someday." That girl was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized, one who sent poisoned cigars, and laughed with a sharpness that chilled my blood. I opened my eyes, the kitchen snapping back into focus. The card still there, its ink shimmering faintly, impossibly. I reached for it, then stopped, my hand hovering as if crossing an invisible line. The air around it felt heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I shook my head, blaming the late hour, but the unease clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Since Martha's death, the house had become a mausoleum of silence. Her laughter, her soft humming as she cooked, her steady hand sorting bills at this very table, all gone. Emily had been my anchor then, or so I'd thought. But after the funeral, she'd drifted, her calls growing sparse, her visits non-existent. When she married Daniel Hale, she stepped into a world of wealth and secrets, leaving me behind like a relic from a life she no longer wanted. The last time I saw her at her wedding, she'd smiled at Daniel with a warmth I hadn't seen in years, but when her eyes met mine, they were cold, distant, as if I were a stranger intruding on her triumph. I stood pacing the creaking floorboards, each step a question I couldn't answer. Why had Emily sent those cigars? She knew I'd quit smoking, knew my lungs were fragile as cracked glass after the pneumonia that nearly ended me. Was it carelessness or something darker? The memory of her voice on the phone, smooth, calculated, with that brittle laugh, gnawed at me. I thought of the Hollows tales, the ones Martha loved to tell, gifts that carried curses, objects imbued with the giver's will. The mahogany box, with its unnatural coldness and gold trim that seemed to pulse, felt like something out of those stories. I'd given it away, but its shadow lingered, a weight in my chest that wasn't just grief. I stopped at the window, the hollow stretching before me, its trees swaying in the wind like sentinels guarding secrets. The night was alive with whispers, faint and fleeting, as if the land itself were trying to tell me something. I thought of Emily's childhood, the moments that had once bound us. One Christmas, when money was tight, I'd found a used bicycle at a garage sale. Its frame rusted but sturdy. I spent nights in the garage repainting it red under the dim glow of a lantern, my hands stained with paint and hope. When Emily saw it on Christmas morning, her face lit up like the stars over the hollow. She hugged me so tight my ribs ached, whispering, "It's perfect, Daddy." How does a child who loved you like that become a woman who sends you death in a polished box? I turned from the window, my gaze falling on the old oak cabinet where I kept Martha's things. Her scarf, her favorite teacup, a stack of letters she'd written to me when I traveled for work. I opened the drawer, pulling out a photograph, Emily at 8, standing beside me at the edge of the hollow, her smile brighter than the wildflowers at her feet. I traced her face with my thumb, my chest tightening. The girl in the photo was gone, replaced by a woman whose eyes gleamed with calculation, whose voice carried no warmth. I wondered when it had happened, when the daughter who clung to me had become the stranger who wanted me gone. The clock ticked on its rhythm, a reminder of time slipping away. I sat again, the card still on the table, its ink now still as if it had grown tired of its own secrets. But the air around it felt different, heavier, as if the room itself held its breath. I thought of Richard, his life hanging by a thread, and Margaret's words. Something unnatural. The doctors had said poison, but what kind of poison? And why I remembered Emily's questions years ago about my pension, my life insurance, her voice casual, but her eyes sharp. She'd asked about beneficiaries, about coverage amounts, as if my death were a transaction she was already planning. I stood again, unable to sit still, and walked to the porch. The night air was cold, the hollow cloaked in darkness, its trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. I leaned against the railing, my hands gripping the worn wood, and closed my eyes. For a moment I swore I felt Martha's presence, her warmth, her steady hand on my shoulder. But when I opened my eyes, there was only the dark and the faint hum of the hollow, like a pulse from the earth itself. I thought of the card, the cigars, the box. They weren't just objects. They were a message, a spell, a challenge. And I would need more than strength to face it. I would need the cunning I'd honed through years of survival, the patience that had kept me alive when my lungs failed. I went back inside the photograph, still in my hand. I placed it beside the card, the two images of Emily, child and betrayer, side by side. The contrast was a knife in my gut, but it also steeled me. I wasn't just a father mourning a lost daughter. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd stared down death and walked away. Emily had made her move, but she didn't know the fire she'd ignited in me. The hollow had taught me its lessons: patience, resilience, the art of listening to whispers others ignored. I would use them all to uncover her truth, to face whatever darkness she'd woven into that gift. As I sat there, the clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the house like a warning. The card gleamed one last time, its ink catching the light in a way that made my breath catch. For a fleeting moment I saw something in the reflection, a flicker of Emily's face, not as she was now, but as she'd been, her eyes wide with wonder. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold reality of the present. I stood, my shadow stretching across the room, and made a silent vow I would not let her erase me. Not with poison, not with betrayal, not with whatever power lay hidden in that cursed box. The game had begun, and I would play it with every ounce of strength I had left. The dawn after my vow felt different, as if the hollow itself had shifted in the night, its air charged with a restless energy. The card "Happy Birthday" sat on my kitchen table, its ink no longer shimmering, but heavy with intent, like a talisman waiting to be deciphered. I hadn't slept, my mind tangled in memories of Emily's laughter and the cold reality of Richard's collapse. The hospital's words, "poison, unnatural," echoed in my chest, each syllable a weight that pressed against my scarred lungs. I knew what I had to do. If Emily had woven a trap, I would unravel it, not with anger but with the patience that had carried me through pneumonia, through loss, through the slow erosion of my daughter's love. I drove to the Willows Hollow police station, the card tucked in my coat pocket, its edges sharp as a secret. The station was a squat brick building, its walls weathered by decades of storms, much like me. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and ink, a stark contrast to the hollow's wild, whispering air. Detective Evelyn Morales met me in the lobby, her eyes sharp as flint, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too much but still believed in truth. She was in her 40s, her dark hair pulled back tightly as if to keep her thoughts in check. "Mr. Carter," she said, her gaze flicking to the card in my hand. "You're saying your daughter sent you cigars, and now your friend's in the ICU?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my bones. "The doctors say it was poison, not an illness." And this, I slid the card across her desk, its ink catching the fluorescent light in a way that made her pause. "This came with them. It's her handwriting. I'd know it anywhere." Morales lifted the card, her fingers careful as if it might burn. She studied it, her brow furrowing slightly, then set it down and leaned back in her chair. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter. Poison's not a word we throw around lightly." She tapped the card, her eyes narrowing. "You're sure this is hers? A father never forgets." I said, my voice colder than I intended. I saw Emily in my mind, her sharp, deliberate script on school notes, birthday cards, the letters she'd stopped writing after Martha died. This was hers, no question. But the ink, it seemed to pulse faintly under the station's harsh lights, a trick of the eye or something more. I didn't mention it. Not yet. Morales nodded, jotting something in her notebook. We'll need to test the cigars. The box too, if you still have it." Her tone was clinical, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, as if she sensed the same strangeness I did. "If there's poison, we'll find it. But I need you to be certain, Jack. This could tear your family apart." "It's already torn," I said, my words flat, but heavy with truth. I thought of Emily's laugh on the phone, high and brittle like glass about to shatter. I thought of Richard, his life hanging by a thread. And I thought of the hollow, its whispers growing louder in my mind as if urging me to look deeper. Morales took the card and promised to send it to the lab with the cigars, which were now in the hospital's evidence locker. As I left the station, the sky was a slate of gray, the hollow's trees swaying in a wind that carried a faint, mournful hum. I drove home my truck, rattling over the gravel roads, my mind racing. The card was gone, but its weight lingered in my pocket, as if it had left a mark on my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's gift was more than poison. It was a message, a spell, a thread in a web I hadn't yet seen. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the house silent save for the ticking of Martha's clock. The absence of the card made the room feel emptier, but the air was still heavy, as if the hollow's whispers had followed me inside. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded back. Emily at 16, slamming doors when I refused to let her stay out late. Emily at 20, her eyes bright with ambition as she spoke of a future I couldn't afford to give her. After Martha's death, she'd asked about my pension, my life insurance, her voice casual, but her gaze sharp like a predator sizing up prey. I'd thought it was grief, or maybe greed. Now I wasn't so sure. I stood pacing the creaking floorboards, my shadow stretching long and thin across the room. The hollow had always been a place of secrets, its stories woven into the roots of its trees. Martha used to say that some gifts carried the giver's soul, binding them to the recipient in ways that defied logic. The mahogany box, with its unnatural coldness, its gold trim that seemed to pulse, felt like one of those gifts. I'd given it to Richard, thinking it harmless, but now I wondered if it had chosen its path, as if guided by a will not entirely Emily's. The phone rang at 2 a.m., shattering the silence. I froze, my heart pounding as if it knew who was calling. I lifted the receiver, my voice steady despite the chill in my bones. "Hello, it's Margaret," came the voice, thick with relief but edged with fear. "Richard's stable. Jack, he's breathing easier. But the doctors, they confirmed it. The poison was in the cigar. Something rare, they said. Not natural." My grip tightened on the receiver, my knuckles whitening. "What kind of poison?" "They called it azotine," she said, her voice trembling. "A plant toxin, lethal in small doses. They don't know how it got there, but Jack, it wasn't an accident." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there, the room spinning slightly as if the hollow itself were closing in. I walked to the porch, the night air cold and sharp, the hollow cloaked in darkness. The stars above were faint, as if reluctant to witness what was unfolding. I clenched the railing, my hands aching, and whispered to the night, "Emily, why would you do this?" The wind answered with a low hum, like a chorus of voices too faint to decipher. I thought of her questions about my finances, her casual remarks about my life insurance, the way she'd distanced herself after her marriage. It wasn't just greed. It was something deeper, something colder, as if she'd been touched by the hollow's shadows. The next day I returned to the station. Morales was waiting her desk, cluttered with files, the card sealed in an evidence bag beside her. We tested the cigars, she said, her voice clipped. Azotine, just like the hospital said. Enough to kill a man in one puff if his system's weak enough. She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "Mr. Carter is there. Any reason your daughter would want you dead?" The question hit like a stone, sinking into the pit of my stomach. I saw Emily in my mind, her as a child, her laughter bright as the hollow's wildflowers, her as a woman, her eyes cold as the mahogany box. "She has her reasons," I murmured, my voice low but steady. "Money, my pension, my life insurance. She's asked about them before more than once. Morales's pen paused, her gaze sharpening. "That's motive," she said. "But we need more than your word. The handwriting's a start, but we'll need to confirm it. And the box—" She hesitated, her fingers brushing the evidence bag. "There's something strange about it. The lab tech said the wood feels off, like it's older than it should be." Her words sent a chill through me, echoing the unease I'd felt since opening the box. I didn't tell her about the hum, the shimmering ink, the whispers in the hollow. Not yet. But I knew she felt it too, a thread of something beyond reason woven into this betrayal. Test everything, I said. The card, the cigars, the box. Whatever she's done, I'll find the truth. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked, each sound a reminder of the hollow's restless spirit. I sat in my chair staring at the photograph of Emily at 8, her smile a ghost of what we'd lost. The air felt heavy, as if the card's absence had left a void that something else was filling. I thought of Emily's call, her laugh, the way she'd asked if I'd tried the cigars. It wasn't just poison she'd sent. It was a challenge, a spell, a declaration of war. And I would meet it not with fear, but with the strength I'd forged in the fires of survival. I stood, my shadow stretching across the room, and walked to the window. The hollow was dark, its trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, as if they were watching, waiting. I thought of Martha, her stories of gifts that bound souls, of the hollow's secrets buried in its roots. Emily had made her move, but she didn't know the fire she'd ignited in me. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd faced death and walked away. And I would face this darkness, whatever it was, human, supernatural, or both, with the patience and cunning of a survivor. The days following my meeting with Detective Morales were a haze of restless vigilance, each moment taut with the weight of Emily's betrayal. The hollow seemed to sense it too, its air heavy with a hum that lingered just beyond hearing, as if the trees themselves were whispering warnings. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, its silence broken only by the ticking of Martha's clock and the creak of floorboards under my pacing feet. The card was gone, sealed in an evidence bag at the station, but its presence lingered in my mind, its shimmering ink a riddle I couldn't solve. Azotine. The poison that nearly killed Richard was no accident. It was Emily's handiwork, her sharp, deliberate script, a signature on a death warrant meant for me. I sat at the kitchen table, the photograph of Emily at 8, staring back at me, her smile, a ghost that haunted my resolve. The truth was a blade in my gut. My daughter, my blood, had tried to erase me. But I wasn't the frail old man she thought me to be. I'd survived pneumonia, outlasted grief, and now I would outwit her. Not with rage, but with the patience that had kept me alive when my lungs burned and my world crumbled. Emily had made her move, but this was a game of chess, not a brawl, and I would play it with the cunning of a survivor. The first step was to protect what she wanted most, my assets. I drove to the office of Mr. Jacobs, my lawyer, a man whose glasses perpetually slid down his nose, his desk a chaos of papers that somehow held order. The hollow's morning mist clung to my truck as I parked, the air thick with a scent of damp earth and something sharper like iron. Jacobs looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing at the steel in my expression. "Jack," he said, setting aside a file, "you look like a man with a war to fight." "I am, I said, my voice steady. I slid a folder across his desk containing my will, my life insurance policy, the deed to the house. "I need to change everything. Emily gets nothing. Not a cent." Jacobs blinked, his fingers pausing on the folder. "That's a big step, Jack. You're sure I thought of the mahogany box, its cold wood and pulsing gold trim. I thought of Richard gasping for air and Emily's laugh brittle as shattered glass. She tried to kill me," I said, my words flat but heavy. "She doesn't get to inherit my life." Jacobs nodded, his expression grim. "Understood. Who do you want listed instead?" I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing against my chest. Richard came to mind, his survival, a mirror of my own, or perhaps a foundation for the children of the hollow, a way to give back to the land that had shaped me. "Anyone but her," I said finally. "I'll decide the details later. For now, make it ironclad. As Jacob scribbled notes, I felt a shift inside me, a spark of strength I hadn't known I still possessed. Emily thought she could outmaneuver me, but she'd forgotten who taught her to play chess to wait for the right moment to strike. I was no pawn. I was a king scarred, but unbroken, and I would protect my kingdom. That evening the hollow seemed to watch me as I drove home, its trees leaning closer, their branches clawing at the sky. The air was thick, the hum I'd sensed before, now a faint pulse like a heartbeat buried in the earth. I stepped onto my porch, the photograph of Emily in my pocket, its edges worn from my touch. Inside I opened my old oak cabinet, pulling out a leather journal I hadn't touched in years. Its pages were yellowed, filled with notes from my days as a mechanic, calculations and sketches that had kept my hands steady when my heart faltered. Now it would serve a new purpose, a record of every move Emily made, every word, every glance that betrayed her intent. I began writing my pen, scratching against the paper, each word a brick in the fortress I was building. Dates, times, conversations, everything I could recall since the cigars arrived. The phone call, her brittle laugh, the hospital's sterile air, Margaret's trembling voice. I wrote until my hand ached, the journal a shield against the darkness creeping into my life. The hollow's whispers seemed to grow louder as I wrote, as if approving my resolve, urging me to see what lay hidden in Emily's actions. The next morning a letter arrived, slipped under my door like a thief in the night. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper with my name scrawled across the top in Emily's sharp script. My stomach tightened as I opened it, the air in the room growing heavy, the hum of the hollow seeping through the walls. "Dad," it read, "I think we should talk. Emily." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made my skin prickle, as if the ink itself held a spell. I saw the card in my mind, its shimmering letters, and wondered if this note carried the same hidden intent. I dialed her number, my hand steady despite the fire in my chest. "Emily," I said when she answered, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You wanted to talk." Her voice was honeyed, cautious, like a predator circling its prey. "Dad, I'm glad you called. I've been worried about you. Can we meet dinner tomorrow, neutral ground?" Neutral ground. The phrase struck me like a warning bell, as if she saw me not as her father but as an enemy to be negotiated with. "Fine," I said, my tone even. "Where the Italian place on the edge of town," she said, her sweetness almost convincing. "Just you and me." I hung up the silence of the house pressing against me. The hollow's hum was louder now, a chorus of whispers that seemed to echo her words. I walked to the window, the trees swaying in a rhythm that felt deliberate, as if they were part of the game. Emily was planning something, but so was I. She thought me weak, a man clinging to the scraps of his life. She didn't know the strength I'd forged in the fires of survival, the patience that had outlasted illness and grief. The next evening, I drove to the restaurant, the hollow's mist curling around my truck like a living thing. The Italian place was small, its windows glowing with candlelight, a facade of warmth that did little to ease the chill in my bones. Emily was already there, sitting by the window, a glass of wine untouched before her. She looked every inch the successful daughter. Perfect hair-tailored dress, a diamond on her hand that caught the light like a warning. "Dad," she said, her smile practiced, almost perfect. "You look good." I sat folding my hands to hide their tremor, my eyes scanning her face for the girl I'd once known. "You wanted to talk," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. She leaned forward, her eyes flicking to my watch, my pen. "Anything that glittered." "I feel terrible, we've been so distant." She said, her tone soft but calculated. "Life's short. Dad, I don't want regrets. I've been worried about you living alone. What if something happens? You should think about arrangements, to make things easier." There it was. The play. Her words were smooth, but her eyes betrayed her gleaming with a hunger that wasn't love. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. "I've thought about it," I said. "In fact, I just updated my will." Her mask cracked just for a moment, a flicker of panic, then gone. "Oh," she said too quickly. "That's good. Responsible." Her smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't need to worry about me, Emily," I said, holding her gaze. "I've taken care of everything." The silence between us was taut like a wire ready to snap. She sipped her wine, her movements deliberate, but I saw the pulse quicken in her throat. The hollow's hum seemed to follow me here, a faint vibration in the air, as if the restaurant itself were part of its domain. I left that dinner with the bitter taste of marinara on my tongue, and a certainty in my gut. Emily wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was probing, testing, measuring my defenses. But she'd learned something she hadn't expected. I was no longer hers to manipulate. Back home, I opened my journal, my pen moving with purpose. I wrote of her smile, her words, the flicker in her eyes when I mentioned the will. The hollow's whispers grew louder, the trees outside swaying in a dance that felt almost sentient. I thought of Martha's stories of gifts, that bound souls of intentions that lingered in objects like the mahogany box. Emily's actions felt like more than greed. There was a darkness to them, a shadow that stretched beyond her control. I stood my shadow stretching across the room and walked to the porch. The night air was cold, the hollow cloaked in darkness, its hum now a steady pulse. I thought of the letter, the card, the cigars, each a piece in a puzzle. I was only beginning to understand. Emily had made her move, but I was no longer just a father mourning a lost daughter. I was a man who'd faced death and walked away a survivor, who'd learned the hollow's lessons, patience, cunning, the art of listening to whispers others ignored. I would use them all to outmaneuver her, to uncover the truth, whether it was born of her heart or something older, something deeper, lurking in the shadows of Willow's Hollow. The hollow seemed to tighten its grip around my house in the days following my dinner with Emily, its air thick with a hum that pulsed like a heartbeat buried in the earth. The memory of her smile, polished, predatory, lingered in my mind as sharp as the ink on her letter. She'd played her part well, cloaking her hunger and concern, but I'd seen the flicker in her eyes when I mentioned my will. She wasn't just after my money. There was something darker, driving her, something that felt older than greed, woven into the very fabric of the hollow's whispers. I wasn't just fighting my daughter. I was fighting a shadow, and I would need every ounce of cunning to survive it. Each night I added to my journal, my pen scratching out every detail of our encounter. Her calculated words, the way her fingers twitched when I spoke of my changed will, the hum in the air that seemed to follow her presence. The leather-bound pages were my shield, a record of truth against the lies Emily was weaving. I'd learned patience in the hollow, listening to its secrets in the rustle of leaves, the creak of oaks. Now I listened to her, piecing together her moves like a chessboard I'd once taught her to master. The first sign of her escalation came on a gray morning, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press against the hollow's edges. I found another letter slipped under my door, its paper crisp, Emily's sharp script scrawled across it. "Dad, we need to talk again. I'm worried about your health. You're not yourself." The words were laced with false care, but the ink shimmered faintly, just like the birthday card, as if it carried a pulse of its own. I held it to the light, my skin prickling, and for a moment I swore I saw a shadow flicker across the page, a shape that wasn't there, like a face peering through fog. I shook my head, blaming the early hour, but the unease clung to me, a whisper from the hollow that refused to be ignored. I drove to Jacobs's office that afternoon, the letter in my pocket, its weight heavier than paper should be. The old lawyer's office smelled of dust and coffee, a stark contrast to the hollow's wild air. I handed him the letter, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "She's not stopping," I said. "She's trying to make me look unstable. I think she's after more than my money now. She wants control." Jacobs adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he read the letter. "This is bold," he murmured. "She's laying groundwork. If she can prove you're unfit, she could petition for guardianship, take everything, your house, your accounts, your freedom." He looked up, his gaze sharp. "Have you noticed anything else? Anything unusual?" I hesitated, the memory of the shimmering ink and the hollow's hum flickering in my mind. I didn't mention it. Jacobs dealt in facts, not folklore, but I nodded. She's moving fast. I need to know what she's planning. Jacobs leaned back, his chair creaking. I got a call yesterday from a firm in town. They sent over documents, your signature on a transfer of assets. A trust fund in Emily's name. I didn't file it, Jack. That's not your signature. The words hit like a stone sinking into my gut. Forgery. Emily wasn't just probing, she was striking her moves bolder, more desperate. I clenched my fists, my knuckles whitening. Show me, I said, my voice low but steady. Jacob slid a folder across the desk, the documents inside crisp and official. My name scrawled at the bottom in a hand that was almost mine. The loops of the K, the slant of the T. They were close, too close. But there was a tremor in the lines, a hesitation no one else would notice. I'd spent years signing work orders, my signature a steady constant even when my lungs failed. This wasn't it. She's good, I said, my lips curling into a grim smile. But not good enough. Jacobs nodded, his expression grim. We'll need a handwriting expert to prove it. I've got someone in mind, a woman who's worked fraud cases for decades. But Jack, this is serious. If Emily's forging documents, she's not just after your money. She's trying to erase you. The word erase echoed in my mind, sharp as the hollow's whispers. I thought of the mahogany box, its unnatural coldness, the poisoned cigars, the shimmering ink. This wasn't just greed. There was a malice to it, a darkness that felt like it stretched beyond Emily, as if the hollow itself were guiding her hand. I thanked Jacobs, my resolve hardening, and drove home the letter and forged documents in my pocket, their weight a reminder of the battle ahead. That night I sat at my kitchen table, my journal open, my pen moving with purpose. I wrote of the forgery, the letter, the flicker of shadow in the ink. The hollow's hum was louder now, a steady pulse that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I walked to the window, the trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost sentient, as if they were watching, waiting. I thought of Martha's stories of objects that carried curses of intentions, that lingered like ghosts. The letter felt like one of those objects, its ink a thread in a web I was only beginning to see. The next morning I found something else, a faint scratch on my truck's brake line, barely visible unless you knew where to look. My heart pounded not with fear but with clarity. I'd been a mechanic once, my hands steady as I rebuilt engines, my eyes sharp for flaws. This wasn't wear and tear. It was deliberate, a cut meant to fail at just the right moment. I knelt beside the truck, the gravel biting into my knees, and traced the scratch with my finger. The hollow's hum seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, as if urging me to act. I called Morales, my voice calm but edged with steel. Someone tampered with my truck, I said. The brake line. It's not an accident. Morales was silent for a moment, then, Stay put, Jack. I'm sending someone to check it, and I'm pulling the lab results on the box. There's something off about it. The wood's older than it should be, like it's from another time. Her words sent a chill through me, echoing the unease I'd felt since the cigars arrived. I didn't tell her about the hum, the whispers, the shadow in the ink. But I knew she felt it too, a thread of something beyond reason woven into Emily's betrayal. Check everything, I said. And hurry. While I waited for the police, I returned to my journal, my pen moving faster now, each word a brick in the fortress I was building. I wrote of the brake line, the forged documents, the letters shimmering ink. I thought of Emily, her calculated smile, her probing questions. She wasn't just after my money, she was trying to control my fate, to bend me to her will. But she'd underestimated me. I wasn't just a father mourning a lost daughter. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd stared down death and walked away a survivor, who'd learned the hollow's lessons, patience, cunning, the art of listening to whispers others ignored. That evening I drove to the edge of the hollow where the trees grew thick and the air felt alive. I needed to think, to feel the land's pulse, to draw strength from its secrets. I parked by an old oak, its branches gnarled like fingers reaching for the sky, and stepped out, the ground soft beneath my boots. The hum was stronger here, a vibration that seemed to rise from the earth itself. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, and for a moment I swore I felt Martha's presence, her warmth, her steady hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than this, Jack," her voice seemed to whisper, carried on the wind. I opened my eyes, the hollow cloaked in twilight, its shadows dancing in a rhythm that felt deliberate. I thought of the forged documents, the scratched brake line, the poisoned cigars. Emily was escalating her moves, bolder, more desperate, as if driven by something beyond herself. I remembered a story Martha told about the hollow's heart, a force that could amplify intent, twisting love into betrayal, greed into destruction. Was Emily its pawn, or its master? I didn't know, but I would find out. I returned home, my journal open, my pen moving with purpose. I wrote of the oak, the hum, the whisper of Martha's voice. I wrote of Emily, her betrayal, a shadow cast across my life. And I wrote of myself, a man forged in the fires of survival, ready to face whatever darkness she'd unleashed. The hollow's hum pulsed through the walls, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I had my cunning, my patience, my strength. And I had the hollow, its secrets, my ally in a war I hadn't chosen, but would win. The hollow had become my ally, its whispers a guide in the war Emily had declared. The air pulsed with a hum that seemed to know my resolve, vibrating through the oaks like a heartbeat older than time. I sat at my kitchen table, my journal open, its pages heavy with the truth of Emily's betrayal, the poisoned cigars, the forged documents, the scratched brake line. Each word I'd written was a brick in the fortress I'd built, a shield against the daughter who'd turned her heart to stone. But shields alone wouldn't win this fight. I needed a trap, a way to draw her out, to make her reveal the darkness driving her. I wasn't just a father betrayed. I was Jack Carter, a survivor forged in the fires of loss, and I would use the hollow's lessons to outwit her. The idea came to me at dawn as the hollow's mist curled around my house like a living thing. I'd learned patience as a mechanic, waiting for the perfect moment to tighten a bolt, to align a gear. Emily was no different. She was a machine of ambition, her gears turning on greed, or perhaps something darker, something woven into the hollow's shadows. I needed bait, something to make her act recklessly, to expose her hand. My assets were her target, my pension, my life insurance, the house. But there was something else, a ghost from my past, that might tempt her, a set of old stock certificates tucked away in a safe, forgotten by most but valuable enough to spark her hunger. The certificates were from a defunct mining company, a risky investment I'd made decades ago when Martha and I were young and foolish. They were worthless now, the company long bankrupt, but Emily didn't know that. To her they'd be a treasure, a hidden fortune I'd kept secret. I could use them to lure her, to make her believe I was careless, vulnerable, an old man clinging to scraps of wealth. The thought brought a grim smile to my lips. She'd taught me chess as a child, but I'd taught her strategy, and I was about to remind her who'd been the master. I drove to Jacobs's office that morning, the hollow's trees leaning closer, their branches whispering approval. The old lawyer looked up as I entered, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Jack," he said, his voice wary. "You've got that look again. What's the plan?" I slid a folder across his desk containing copies of the stock certificates, their faded ink and yellowed edges a relic of a life long gone. "These," I said, tapping the folder. "They're worthless, but Emily doesn't know that. I'm going to let her think they're my secret fortune. I want her to come for them." Jacob's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You're setting a trap," he said, a hint of admiration in his tone. "Dangerous, Jack. If she's forging documents, tampering with brakes, she's desperate. You sure you want to play this game?" "I'm not playing," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ending it." He nodded, pulling out a notepad. "What do you need from me? Make it look real," I said. "Draft a letter, something official, mentioning the certificates. Send it to me, but make sure it's traceable to Emily's firm. She'll see it and she'll act." Jacobs agreed, his pen moving with purpose. I left his office with a fire in my chest, not of anger but of resolve. The hollow's hum followed me, a steady pulse that seemed to echo my steps. Back home I staged the bait. I left the safe in my study, slightly ajar, the certificates visible but not obvious, their edges peeking out like a lure. I scattered papers on my desk, old bills, bank statements, making it look like I'd been careless, distracted, an old man slipping into frailty. But every move was calculated, every paper placed with precision. Emily would come, and I would be ready. That night I called Daniel, Emily's husband, whose silence had been a shadow in this war. He answered on the third ring, his voice heavy with something I couldn't name, guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Jack," he said, his tone cautious. "It's late. I know," I said, my voice soft but deliberate. "I need to see you, Daniel, tomorrow at the house. There's something you should know about. Some old stocks I found. Valuable ones." There was a pause, a heartbeat too long. "Stocks," he said, his voice tightening. "What kind?" "Come over," I said, letting my words trail off as if I were too tired to explain. "I'll show you." I hung up, knowing he'd tell Emily, knowing she'd take the bait. The hollow's hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls as if the land itself were watching, waiting. The next day Daniel arrived alone, his face pale, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if expecting shadows to move. He stood in my study, his hands shoved in his pockets while I played the part of a weary father. "Found these in the safe," I said, gesturing to the certificates, my voice trembling just enough to sell the lie. "From an old mining company. Could be worth a fortune, Daniel. I was going to tell Emily, but I don't know if I trust her." His eyes flicked to the safe, a hunger flashing before he masked it. "You should be careful, Jack," he said, his voice strained. "Things like that. People might try to take them." I nodded, letting my shoulders slump, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm getting old, Daniel. Maybe I should just give them to you and Emily. Keep it in the family." He swallowed his jaw tight, and I knew the seed was planted. He left with promises to talk later, but I saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he glanced at the safe one last time. The hollow's hum pulsed stronger as he drove away, a chorus of whispers that seemed to approve my deception. That night I heard it, a faint creak in the house, not the usual settling of old wood, but a deliberate step. I lay in bed, my heart steady, my senses sharp. I'd rigged the study with a small camera hidden in a bookshelf, its lens trained on the safe. I'd learned vigilance in the hollow, listening to its secrets. And now I listened to my own house, waiting for Emily to make her move. The creak came again, closer now, and I slipped from bed, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. I stood in the shadowed hallway, my breath shallow, and watched as a figure moved into the study. It was Emily, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight streaming through the window. She wore gloves, her movements precise, like a thief trained for stealth. She knelt by the safe, her fingers working quickly, pulling out the certificates with a hunger that made my chest ache. This wasn't my daughter, not the girl who'd chased fireflies in the hollow. This was a stranger driven by a darkness I couldn't name, her eyes gleaming with a light that wasn't entirely her own. I stepped into the doorway, my voice low but steady. "Looking for something, Emily." She froze the certificates in her hand, her face pale as the moonlight. For a moment I saw the child she'd been, her eyes wide with fear, but then the mask returned, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth, almost convincing. "I was just checking on you. I heard a noise." I stepped closer, my shadow stretching across the room, the hollow's hum vibrating in my bones. "You heard a noise," I repeated, my tone flat. "And you thought you'd check my safe." Her smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the certificates. "You're not well. Dad, I'm worried about you. These stocks, you shouldn't be handling things like this alone." I laughed, a low, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet. "You're worried about me," I said, stepping closer still. "Like you were worried when you sent those cigars, when you forged my signature, when you cut my brake line." Her eyes widened, the mask slipping completely, and for a moment I saw something else in her gaze. A flicker of something not entirely human, as if the hollow's shadows had taken root in her soul. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. I had to. Had to, I said, my voice sharp now, cutting through the air. You had to try to kill me. She backed away, clutching the certificates, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. But before she could speak, the door opened behind me, and Daniel stepped into the room, his face ashen. Emily, he said, his voice breaking. What are you doing? The air grew heavier, the hollow's hum rising to a crescendo as if the land itself were bearing witness. Daniel's eyes flicked to me, then to Emily, and I saw the truth in them, guilt, regret, a man caught in a web he hadn't woven. Jack, he said, his voice low. I didn't know. Not at first. But the breaks, the cigars, she told me, it was for your own good to protect you. I didn't believe her, not after I saw the papers. Emily's face twisted, her eyes blazing with a fury that wasn't entirely her own. You traitor, she hissed, her voice sharp as the wind outside. You were supposed to help me. Help you kill him, Daniel said, stepping closer, his hands shaking. I can't do this, Emily. Not anymore. The room seemed to pulse, the hollow's hum vibrating through the walls, as if the land were judging her. I stood my ground, my heart steady, my resolve unbroken. It's over, Emily, I said. The camera saw everything. The police will too. Her eyes darted to the bookshelf where the camera's tiny lens glinted in the moonlight. She dropped the certificates, her hands trembling, and for a moment I thought she'd run. But then she laughed, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed the hollow's whispers. You think you've won, Dad? She said, her voice low, almost otherworldly. You don't know what's coming. She turned and fled, the door slamming behind her, the certificates scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Daniel sank into a chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, Jack, he whispered. I should have stopped her sooner. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You stopped her now, I said. That's enough. The hollow's hum faded, leaving only silence, but I felt its presence, still a guardian watching over me. I'd set the trap, and Emily had fallen into it, her desperation revealing her truth. But her final words lingered, a warning that this wasn't the end. There was something more, something darker woven into her betrayal, and I would need all my strength to face it. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd survived death and betrayal, and I would not falter now. The night Emily fled my study, the hollow seemed to hold its breath, its hum fading to a whisper as if the land itself were waiting for the final move in this deadly game. I stood in the doorway, the scattered stock certificates at my feet, their faded ink a testament to my deception. Daniel's shoulders shook in the chair, his whispered apologies mingling with the silence of the house. The camera's tiny lens glinted in the moonlight, a silent witness to Emily's desperation, her gloved hands clutching what she thought was her prize. But her parting words, "You don't know what's coming," echoed in my mind, sharp as the hollow's wind. This wasn't over. Not yet. I knelt, gathering the certificates, my hands steady, despite the fire in my chest. The air was heavy, charged with the same pulse I'd felt since the mahogany box arrived, as if the hollow were watching, judging. Daniel looked up, his face pale, his eyes haunted. "Jack," he said, his voice breaking. "She's not herself. There's something wrong with her, like she's not alone." His words sent a chill through me, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I'd sensed, the flicker in Emily's eyes, the shimmering ink, the hum that seemed to guide her actions. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice calm but firm. "We're going to stop her, Daniel, but I need you to tell me everything." He nodded, his hands trembling as he spoke. "It started months ago," he said. "She was obsessed with your money, your house, but it wasn't just greed. She'd wake up at night muttering about voices, about something calling her from the hollow. She said it told her what to do, the cigars, the papers, the breaks. I thought she was losing it, but then I saw her with that box. It wasn't normal, Jack. It glowed like it was alive." The hollow's hum pulsed faintly, as if in agreement, and I felt the weight of Martha's stories of gifts that carried curses of a land that amplified intent. I didn't dismiss Daniel's words. I couldn't, not after what I'd seen, what I'd felt. "Stay here," I said, standing. "I'm calling Morales." Detective Morales arrived within the hour, her face grim, as she watched the camera footage on my laptop. Emily's silhouette moved across the screen, her gloved hands rifling through the safe, her eyes gleaming with a light that wasn't entirely her own. Morales paused the video, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "This is enough to bring her in," she said. Her voice clipped. "But Jack, there's more. The lab results came back on the box. The wood, it's not mahogany. It's something older, something they can't identify. And the gold trim, it's not gold. It's an alloy, something they've never seen before." Her words hung in the air, heavy as the hollows mist. I thought of the box's unnatural coldness, its pulsing trim, the way it seemed to drink the light. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my bones. "I'm saying," Morales said, her eyes meeting mine, "that this isn't just a crime. There's something else at play here, something I can't explain. But we need to move fast. If Emily's desperate, she won't stop." I nodded, my mind racing. Emily's actions weren't just betrayal. They were a ritual, a dance with a force I didn't understand. But I wasn't helpless. I'd survived pneumonia, outlasted grief, and now I'd outwit whatever darkness had taken root in my daughter. "Set a trap," I said. "One last time. I know how to make her come to me." Morales raised an eyebrow, but she didn't argue. "Tell me what you need." I outlined the plan, my voice steady, each word a brick in the trap I was building. Dinner at my house, a staged meal where I'd play the part of a frail old man, vulnerable and unaware. I'd invite Emily, let her think she had one final chance to finish what she'd started. Morales would have officers nearby, hidden in the hollow's shadows, cameras and microphones rigged throughout the house. Daniel would be there, his guilt a leash to keep him honest. And I'd be ready, my journal, my shield, my cunning, my weapon. The next evening, the house was prepared. The dining table was set with Martha's old china, the plates gleaming under the chandelier's soft light. I'd cooked a simple meal, soup, bread, a bottle of wine, each dish placed with precision, cameras hidden in the corners, their lenses glinting like the hollow's eyes. Daniel sat across from me, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. "She's coming," he said, his voice low. "She thinks you're slipping, Jack. She thinks she's won." I nodded, my heart steady despite the weight of the moment. "Let her think that," I said. "It's her weakness." The doorbell rang, a sharp note that cut through the silence. I opened the door. And there she was, Emily, her smile polished, her eyes sharp as the ink that had haunted me. She wore a dark coat. Her hands gloved a small bag slung over her shoulder. "Dad," she said, her voice honeyed, almost convincing. "I'm so glad you invited me." I forced a smile, my hands trembling just enough to sell the lie. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "It's been too long." We sat at the table, the soup steaming between us, the air thick with the hollow's hum. Emily's eyes flicked to the corners of the room as if she sensed the trap, but her smile never wavered. "You look tired, Dad," she said, her tone soft but probing. "Are you sure you're okay living alone?" "I manage," I said, spooning soup into my bowl, my movement slow, deliberate. "But I've been thinking, maybe it's time to hand things over. The stocks, the house. I don't need it all." Her eyes lit up, a flicker of greed that wasn't entirely her own. "That's wise," she said, leaning forward. "I could help, you know. Take care of everything." I nodded, letting the silence stretch, my hand resting on the table inches from the wine bottle. "You always were good at taking care," I said, my voice heavy with meaning. She reached for her bag, her movements smooth, practiced. "Let me get something," she said, pulling out a small vial, its contents glinting in the chandelier's light. "Just a little something to make the soup special." My heart pounded, but I kept my face blank, my hands steady. The cameras were rolling, Morales's officers waiting in the shadows. "Special," I said. my voice soft, almost curious. She smiled, her fingers deft as she uncorked the vial, a faint shimmer rising from its contents like the ink on her card. "For your health," she said, her voice sweet, but laced with something darker. She tipped the vial over my bowl, a single drop falling, the soup rippling as if it knew what was coming. Before she could pour more, Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Emily, stop!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "You can't do this!" Her head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing with a fury that wasn't entirely human. "You coward!" she hissed, the vial trembling in her hand. "You're ruining everything!" The door burst open, Morales and her officers flooding the room, their flashlights cutting through the dim light like blades. "Emily Hale Morales," said, her voice sharp as steel. "Step away from the table. You're under arrest." Emily froze, the vial slipping from her fingers, shattering on the floor, its contents hissing as they met the wood. The hollow's hum rose to a crescendo, vibrating through the walls as if the land itself were bearing witness. She backed away, her eyes darting to the door, but there was no escape. The officers closed in, their handcuffs glinting in the light. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes flickering with that otherworldly light. "It wasn't just me, it was the hollow. It told me what to do." Morales ignored her, securing the cuffs, but I saw the unease in her eyes, the same unease I'd felt since the cigars arrived. I stood, my shadow stretching across the room, my heart heavy but unbroken. "You made your choice, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "The hollow didn't force you to poison a man, to forge my name, to cut my brakes." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the girl she'd been, her braids swinging as she chased fireflies. Then it was gone, replaced by a stranger. Her face twisted with rage, and something deeper, something not entirely her own. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "The hollow doesn't forget." They led her away, her footsteps echoing in the silence, the hollow's hum fading, as if satisfied. Daniel sank back into his chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice soft but firm. "You did the right thing," I said. "It's over." But it wasn't. Not entirely. The cameras had caught everything. The vial, the drop in the soup, Emily's confession. The police had the forged documents, the tampered brake line, the poisoned cigars. But her words lingered, a warning that the hollow's shadow stretched further than I'd imagined. I walked to the porch, the night air cold, the trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. The hum was faint now, but it was there, a reminder that this wasn't just a human betrayal. There was something else, something older woven into the land's roots. I thought of Martha, her stories of gifts that bound souls of the hollow's heart, amplifying intent. Emily had fallen, but the darkness that drove her wasn't gone. I stood there, my hands gripping the railing, my resolve afire in my chest. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd faced death and walked away, a survivor who'd learned the hollow's lessons. I'd won this battle, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. The morning of the trial dawned cold and gray, the hollow cloaked in a mist that seemed to pulse with the same hum I'd felt since Emily's betrayal began. I stood on my porch, my breath visible in the chill air, my journal clutched in my hand like a talisman. Its pages held the truth, every detail of the poisoned cigars, the forged documents, the tampered brake line, the shimmering vial Emily had tried to slip into my soup. The camera footage, Daniel's confession, and Morales's relentless investigation had built a case as solid as the oaks that guarded the hollow. But as I drove to the courthouse, the weight of what was coming pressed against my chest, not with fear, but with a grief that cut deeper than any blade. Emily wasn't just my daughter, she was a shadow of the girl I'd loved, twisted by a darkness I couldn't fully name. The courthouse was a stone monolith on the edge of Willow's Hollow, its walls etched with decades of secrets, much like the land itself. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where truth was supposed to prevail, but often bent under the weight of human flaws. I took my seat in the gallery, my hands steady despite the fire in my scarred lungs. Daniel sat beside me, his face pale, his eyes haunted by the choice he'd made to betray his wife to save me. Morales was there too, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room as if the hollow's whispers had followed us here. Emily sat at the defendant's table, her dark hair pulled back, her face pale, but composed, her eyes devoid of the warmth I'd once known. She wore a tailored suit, her hands folded neatly, but I saw the tension in her fingers, the faint tremor that betrayed her calm. The prosecutor, a woman named Clara Evans, with a voice like steel, laid out the charges: attempted murder, forgery, tampering with evidence. Each word was a hammer striking the air, and I felt the hollow's hum pulse faintly, as if the land itself were listening. The evidence was damning. Evans presented the camera footage from my study. Emily's gloved hands rifling through the safe, her eyes gleaming with a light that wasn't entirely human. The video from the dinner played next, her fingers tipping the shimmering vial into my soup, her voice sweet but laced with venom. Daniel's testimony followed, his voice breaking as he recounted her obsession, her mutterings about the hollow's voices, the mahogany box that seemed to glow in her hands. The lab reports confirmed the azotine in the cigars, the tampered brake line, the unidentifiable alloy in the box's trim. Each piece was a thread in the web Emily had woven, now unraveling before the court. I took the stand, my journal in my hands, its leather cover worn from nights of relentless writing. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with anticipation as I faced Evans' questions. "Mr. Carter," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "can you confirm the handwriting on the card that accompanied the cigars?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, despite the ache in my chest. "It's Emily's. I'd know it anywhere. Her school notes, her letters, her birthday cards. It's hers." "And the cigars," Evans pressed. "You gave them to Richard Hale because you no longer smoke." "Yes," I said, my gaze flicking to Emily. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the girl who'd chased fireflies in the hollow, her braids swinging. Then it was gone, replaced by a stranger, her gaze cold, almost otherworldly. "I had pneumonia 2 years ago. Emily knew I couldn't smoke. She knew." The courtroom murmured, the sound like the hollow's whispers, faint but restless. Evans held up the card sealed in its evidence bag, its ink catching the light in a way that made my skin prickle. "And this card," she said, "it was with the cigars that poisoned Mr. Hale." "Yes," I said, my voice low but firm. "It was her gift, her message." Emily's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Hargrove, cross-examined me, his questions probing for weakness. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone smooth, "isn't it possible you misunderstood your daughter's intentions? A gift perhaps meant to reconnect, not to harm." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the stand, my voice steady as stone. "A gift doesn't come with poison," I said. "A gift doesn't come with forged signatures or cut brake lines. My daughter tried to kill me. That's not a misunderstanding." The courtroom fell silent, the hollow's hum pulsing faintly in my ears, as if approving my words. Hargrove sat down, his face tight, and I stepped down, my heart heavy but unbroken. Emily's eyes followed me, a flicker of something, not regret but defiance, as if the hollow's shadows still held her. The trial stretched over days, each piece of evidence a nail in Emily's coffin. The handwriting expert confirmed the card and forged documents were hers, the loops of her K&T betraying her despite her skill. Richard took the stand, his voice weak but resolute, recounting the cigars, the collapse, the hospital's sterile air. Margaret's testimony followed, her words sharp with pain, accusing Emily of targeting not just me, but her husband, an innocent caught in her web. The jury watched, their faces grim as the truth unfolded like a storm breaking over the hollow. When Emily took the stand, the room seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, the hum louder, as if the hollow itself were present. She spoke softly, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a practiced innocence. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said, her hands clasped. "I was worried about Dad. He's alone, not himself. I thought I was helping." The lie was smooth, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, that same otherworldly light I'd seen at the dinner. Evans didn't hesitate. "Helping," she said, her voice sharp. "By poisoning cigars, by forging documents, by cutting brake lines." Emily's mask cracked, her hands trembling. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising almost a hiss. "It wasn't just me. The hollow, it told me what to do. It showed me the way." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the jury shifting uneasily. Hargrove tried to redirect, but the damage was done. Emily's words hung in the air, a confession wrapped in madness or perhaps truth. I thought of the mahogany box, its unidentifiable wood, its pulsing trim. I thought of Martha's stories of the hollow's heart amplifying intent. Was Emily a pawn, or had she chosen this path? I didn't know, but her words confirmed what I'd felt. This wasn't just betrayal. It was something deeper, something tied to the land itself. The jury deliberated for only a day. When they returned, the foreman stood, his voice steady. "We find the defendant Emily Hale guilty on all counts: attempted murder, forgery, and tampering with evidence." The gavel fell, a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. Emily's face was stone, her eyes fixed on some distant point, that strange light flickering one last time. The judge sentenced her to 15 years with the possibility of parole after 12. As the officers led her away, her wrists cuffed, she turned to me, her voice low, almost a whisper. "The hollow's not done with you, Dad." Her words sent a chill through me, not because I feared her, but because they echoed the hum I'd felt, the whispers I'd heard. The courtroom emptied, the air heavy with the weight of justice, but I felt no triumph. Only grief, sharp and cold, for the daughter I'd lost to a darkness I couldn't name. Daniel gripped my arm, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said. "I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it in time," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "That's enough." Morales approached, her face grim, but softened by something like respect. "You did good, Jack," she said. "But that box, we're still testing it. There's something about it we can't explain. The ink, the wood, it's not normal." I nodded, the hollow's hum faint, but present, a reminder that this wasn't over. "Keep me posted," I said, my voice low. "I need to know what we're dealing with." I drove home, the hollow's mist curling around my truck, its trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost mournful. The house was silent. Martha's clock ticking steadily, a counterpoint to the hum that lingered in my bones. I opened my journal, my pen moving with purpose, recording the trial. Emily's words, the flicker in her eyes. I thought of the box sealed in evidence, its secrets still locked away. I thought of Martha, her stories of the hollow's heart of gifts that bound souls. Emily was gone, but the darkness she'd touched wasn't. I walked to the porch, the night air cold, the hollow cloaked in darkness. The hum was faint now, but it was there, a guardian, and a mystery. I stood taller, my hands gripping the railing, my resolve a fire in my chest. I was Jack Carter, a man who'd faced death and betrayal and walked away. I'd won this battle, but the hollow's secrets remained a puzzle I'd yet to solve. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it with the same patience, the same cunning, the same strength that had brought me this far. The hollow seemed quieter in the weeks after Emily's trial, its hum softened to a faint whisper, as if the land itself were exhaling after the storm. The courthouse's gavel had fallen, sealing her fate 15 years behind bars, her eyes flickering with that strange, otherworldly light as she was led away. Her final words, "The hollow's not done with you," Dad, lingered in my mind, a riddle wrapped in the mist that clung to Willow's Hollow. I'd won the battle, exposed her betrayal with camera's cunning, and the truth etched in my journal's pages. But victory tasted like ash, heavy with the grief of a father who'd lost his daughter to a darkness I couldn't fully name. My house, once a battlefield, felt empty. Now its silence no longer a threat, but a canvas for reflection. Martha's clock ticked steadily, its rhythm a counterpoint to the hollow's whispers which still pulsed faintly in the air. I sat at the kitchen table, my journal open, its leather cover, worn from nights of relentless writing. The pages held everything: the poisoned cigars, the forged documents, The tampered brake line, the shimmering vial, Emily's eyes, glowing with a light that wasn't hers. I'd faced her conspiracy and walked away, but the hollow's secrets remained a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. I closed the journal, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. The photograph of Emily at 8 sat beside it. Her smile a ghost of a time when love was simple, when the hollow was just a backdrop to our laughter. I traced her face with my thumb, the paper soft under my touch, and whispered, "Where did you go?" The question hung in the air unanswered, but the hollow's hum pulsed faintly as if offering comfort, or perhaps a warning. I needed to move forward to rebuild what Emily's betrayal had shattered. The house was too big for one man, its rooms filled with echoes of Martha and Emily. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the garden, a patch of earth behind the house where Martha had once grown wildflowers. It was overgrown now, tangled with weeds, but I saw potential in its chaos. I spent mornings there, my hands in the soil, pulling roots and planting seeds, marigolds, lavender, things that could thrive in the hollow's unpredictable soil. The work was slow, deliberate, like the patience I'd learned as a mechanic, as a survivor. Each seed was a promise, a small act of defiance against the darkness that had tried to claim me. The hollow seemed to approve, its hum softening as I worked, the trees swaying in a rhythm that felt almost gentle. I'd heard Martha's stories of the land's heart, how it could amplify intent for good or ill. Maybe my gardening was an offering, a way to balance the scales after Emily's malice. I didn't know if the hollow was listening, but I felt stronger in its presence, my scarred lungs steady as I breathed in the earth's sharp scent. Daniel came by often, his guilt, a shadow that lingered in his eyes. He'd betrayed Emily to save me, and the weight of that choice hung heavy. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said one afternoon, sitting on the porch as I watered the garden. "I should have seen it sooner, stopped her before it got this far." I set the watering can down, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You stopped her when it mattered," I said, my voice steady. "That's enough." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the hollow's trees met the sky. "She wasn't herself," he said, his voice low. "That box, the way she talked about the hollow, it changed her." I thought of the mahogany box, its unidentifiable wood, its pulsing trim now locked in evidence. Morales had called last week, her voice tight with unease. "The lab's still testing it," she'd said. "The ink on that card, it's got traces of something organic, like it's alive. And the wood, it's older than anything we've dated. We're sending it to a specialist." Her words had chilled me, not because I feared the box, but because they confirmed what I'd felt: the hollow was more than land. It was a force, a presence, and Emily had touched its darkness. I didn't tell Daniel about the hum, the whispers, the flicker in Emily's eyes. Instead, I handed him a beer, the bottle cold from the fridge. "You're still family," I said, my voice soft but firm. "We'll get through this." He took the bottle, his eyes wet, and nodded. We sat in silence, the hollow's hum faint but present, a reminder that we were both survivors of its shadows. Daniel started visiting more, helping in the garden, his hands steady as we planted roses, their thorns a quiet echo of the pain we'd endured. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but a step toward healing, a way to rebuild what Emily had broken. I started volunteering at the community center, a small building on the edge of the hollow where kids gathered after school. I taught them about engines, my hands steady as I showed them how to take apart a carburetor, how to listen for a machine's heartbeat. They laughed, their voices bright as Emily's once was, and I felt a spark of purpose I hadn't known I'd lost. The hollow's hum seemed to follow me there, softer now, like a lullaby, as if the land approved of my efforts to give back. One evening, as I locked up the community center, Morales called. "Jack," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "We got the final report on the box. The wood, it's not from any known species. The alloy in the trim doesn't match anything on the periodic table. And the ink, it's got traces of something that reacts to light like it's alive. We're sealing it away, Jack. It's not safe." I stood in the parking lot, the hollow's trees swaying in the distance, their branches catching the last light of day. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chill in my bones. "I don't know," she said. But Emily's ramblings about the hollow, they're not just madness. There's something here, something we can't explain. "Be careful, Jack." I hung up the hollow's hum, pulsing faintly as if in agreement. I thought of Martha's stories of gifts that bound souls of a land that amplified intent. Emily had touched that darkness, let it guide her hand, but I'd chosen a different path. I'd planted seeds, taught children, rebuilt my life. The hollow had tested me, and I'd emerged stronger, my resolve a fire that no shadow could extinguish. I drove home, the mist curling around my truck, the hollow's presence, a quiet companion. The garden was blooming now, marigolds glowing in the moonlight, their colors a defiance against the darkness. I sat on the porch. Martha's clock ticking inside its rhythm, a reminder of time moving forward. I thought of Emily locked away, her eyes haunted by a light I couldn't name. I grieved for her, for the girl she'd been, but I didn't let it consume me. I'd faced death, betrayal, and the hollow's secrets, and I'd walked away. The hum was faint now, almost a song, as if the hollow were at peace. I leaned back in my chair, the photograph of Emily in my pocket, its edges worn but comforting. I didn't know what the box was or what force had driven Emily's hand, but I knew this. I was Jack Carter, a man forged in the fires of survival, a man who'd learned the hollow's lessons: patience, cunning, resilience. I'd found peace in the garden, in the laughter of children, in the quiet strength of moving forward. The stars above the hollow were bright, their light steady, unyielding. I closed my eyes, the hum a soft lullaby, and felt Martha's presence, her warmth a whisper on the wind. "You did good, Jack," she seemed to say. And for the first time in years, I believed her.